Ever feel like you're drowning in information? Trying to stay sharp, informed, ahead of the curve, but there's just too much to read, too many podcasts to listen to.
Yeah, it's a fire hose of data out there.
Exactly. We all want those golden nuggets, those key insights that actually make a difference. But who has the time to sift through it all?
Right.
Well, that's what we're doing for you right here. Consider this your cheat sheet, your shortcut to what really matters.
And today, we're going deep on something absolutely fundamental to success.
Absolutely fundamental and often overlooked.
We're not talking about the latest tech trends, the hottest new marketing strategies.
Not today.
No, we're talking about something even more foundational. The who.
The who. We're always obsessed with the what, right? What's our strategy? What product are we launching? What systems are we implementing?
Yeah, the what gets all the attention.
But those brilliant plans, those game-changing innovations, they're only as good as the people executing them.
Jim Collins, the management guru, he nailed it. He said the most important decisions aren't just about what you do, but about who you have doing it.
Exactly. If you mess up the who,
well, your brilliant what might not be so brilliant anymore.
It's a recipe for disaster.
Today, we're exploring a proven method for making dramatically better who decisions. This isn't some feel-good theory. It's based on hard data. A study of over 300 CEOs by Dr. Stephen N. Kaplan at the University of Chicago, plus insights from some of the most successful business leaders out there.
The brains behind this. Geoff Smart and Randy Street of ghSMART. Their work is, well, kind of revolutionary.
Because here's the thing. Bad who decisions, they don't just hurt your business, they hurt you, personally.
They really do. And I think the story of Nate Thompson, CEO of SpectraLogic, illustrates that perfectly. Now, SpectraLogic is a thriving company.
Yeah.
But in the early days, Thompson was constantly battling the fallout from bad hires. It was so bad that he couldn't even enjoy a family vacation, constantly putting out fires started by the wrong people.
And he wasn't just winging it, He was doing interviews, checking resumes, trying to assess fit. He really thought he was hiring capable people.
He did. But the reality was often a disaster. And I'm not talking about minor slip-ups. These mishires had serious consequences. One guy even embezzled $90,000 by playing fast and loose with the accounting.
Talk about a hard lesson in the cost of a bad who decision.
And yeah, the financial impact was huge. But as Thompson told Smart and Street, it was the personal toll that really got to him. The constant misfires meant he was chained to his desk.
Even when he did manage to physically get away, his mind was still stuck at the office.
Exactly. He told this story about taking his family skiing in Vail. Instead of enjoying the slopes, he spent the first 4 hours of every day on the phone and buried in emails, basically doing the jobs of the people he'd hired poorly.
Ouch.
And he remembers his wife and kids just looking at him with this, knowing look, and then heading off to ski without him.
Heartbreaking.
It really shows how a bad who decision can poison everything. Your business, your family, your peace of mind.
And that's exactly what we want to help you avoid.
Right. That's the mission of this deep dive.
We want to give you the tools to identify and attract the right people for your team, for your venture. Less stress, more success. That's the goal.
So first things first. Why do intelligent, experienced people often make such terrible hiring decisions?
You'd think we'd be better at it, right?
You would. It often feels like a total crapshoot.
Well, Steve Kerr, the management expert, he called hiring a mysterious black art.
Mysterious black art. That's one way to put it.
And a lot of us, we fall back on these hiring practices that, well, they just don't work. Smart and Street call it voodoo hiring.
Voodoo hiring. I like that. Tell me more. What are some of these voodoo methods we need to watch out for?
Well, the first one is the art critic. This is hiring based on gut feeling, first impression.
Oh, yeah. You meet someone, you like them, you think they'd be a good fit.
Exactly. And while trusting your gut works great for some things, like appreciating art, it's a terrible way to hire. Just like a skilled art forger can fool an expert, a candidate who's really good at interviewing can create a totally false impression.
It's like judging a book by its cover. Or maybe trying to choose a life partner based on a first date. Sparks might fly, but that doesn't mean you're compatible in the long run. What's another voodoo trap?
The chatterbox. This is the interview that's all about chit-chat. Hobbies, the news, anything but the candidate's ability to actually do the job.
You spend an hour talking about your favorite sports teams, and suddenly you're offering them the job.
Yeah, building rapport is important, but the focus should be on whether this person can be a valuable colleague, someone who helps you achieve your goals, not just someone you'd have a beer with.
Okay, makes sense. What about personality tests? A lot of companies use those.
Ah, yes. The psychological and personality tester. Now, this is interesting. The Handbook of Industrial Organizational Psychology, a leading resource in the field, they actually advise against using personality tests as the main tool for executive selection.
Really?
Yeah. They often don't predict actual job performance in complex roles. Plus, savvy candidates can figure out the right answers.
So asking if someone prefers working alone or in a group,
Or whether they see the glass as half full or half empty.
that won't actually tell you if they can lead a product team to success.
Exactly. They might give you a glimpse into someone's personality, but not their ability to actually do the job.
Right. So personality tests, use with caution.
Definitely. Then there's the aptitude tester. Aptitude tests can be useful, sure, but they shouldn't be the only thing you look at. A high IQ doesn't guarantee someone has the experience, the drive, the cultural fit to succeed.
It's only one piece of the puzzle.
Exactly. And finally, we have the fortune teller. This is all about those hypothetical questions. What would you do in this situation? How would you handle this challenge?
But isn't that kind of necessary? I mean, you want to see how they think on their feet.
Sure, but the problem is what people say they do and what they actually do. Often two very different things. As Smart and Street say, it's the walk that counts, not the talk.
So those hypothetical scenarios,
Yeah.
not the best predictor of real-world performance.
Not really.
Okay, so we've covered what not to do, these voodoo hiring practices. What about the flip side? What should we be looking for? How do you define an A player?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And Smart and Street are very clear. An A player isn't just any top performer. They're the right top performer. Someone with exceptional talent, sure, but who also fits perfectly with the role, the company, and the culture. And, most importantly, someone who's likely to deliver specific, measurable results.
So raw talent isn't enough. It's about the synergy between talent, the demands of the job, and the company's overall DNA.
Exactly. They have a very specific definition. An A player is someone with at least a 90% chance of achieving outcomes that only the top 10% of possible candidates could achieve. They're the outliers, the game changers.
That's a high bar.
Yeah.
Can you give me a concrete example of how this who focus really drives success?
Absolutely. Ken Griffin, the founder of Citadel, he's convinced that the who, the people on his team, has been a far bigger factor in their success than their investment strategies.
More important than the what, the actual work they do.
That's what he says. And he tells this story about using the ghSMART process when hiring traders. One candidate had a phenomenal resume, killer track record. But when they asked him how he handled a difficult boss, his answer was, I sent an email to all my colleagues explaining how incompetent our boss was.
Oh, wow. That's ballsy.
And not in a good way. His technical skills were off the charts, but that response, huge red flag, showed a lack of judgment, poor interpersonal skills, not a good fit for Citadel's culture.
It's a reminder that sometimes the most impressive candidates on paper
Aren't always the best fit.
Exactly. You need to dig deeper. What other insights did they share about getting the who right?
David Bonderman, co-founder of the private equity firm Texas Pacific Group, looked at their decades of experience. They concluded that after buying well and selling well, the single biggest factor in a company's success.
The who?
The who? An A-level management team. And he said the difference in returns between companies with an A CEO versus a B CEO wasn't just a little bit better.
It was huge.
He said it was an order of magnitude difference. That's like 10 times better.
Wow. That really drives home the point.
It does.
So, we know what not to do, the voodoo hiring traps, and we have a clear definition of an A player, but how do we actually find and hire these people?
That's where the ghSMART A method for hiring comes in. It's a 4-step process that Smart and Street developed. They actually use the letter A as a visual representation of the steps.
Okay, the A method. I'm intrigued. Walk me through it.
So the first step, the foundation of the A, is scorecard. This is a detailed document that defines exactly what you need this person to achieve. It's not just a job description. It lays out specific, measurable outcomes, as well as the skills and behaviors required to succeed in that role within your company culture.
It's the blueprint.
Exactly. The second step, the first upward stroke of the A, is source. This is about proactively identifying and engaging top talent before you even have a job opening.
So you're building a talent pipeline, always on the lookout.
Always be recruiting. That's the idea. The third step, the second upward stroke of the A, is select. This is where you use structured, fact-based interviews to evaluate candidates against your scorecard. No more gut feelings, no more voodoo, just data.
Love it. Data-driven hiring.
And finally, the crossbar of the A is sell. Once you've identified the A players, you need to convince them to join your team.
Because the best people always have options.
Always.
Okay. Scorecard, source, select, sell. The A method. Let's dive deeper into that first step. The scorecard. Why is it so crucial?
Well, Smart and Street say most hiring failures happen because the hiring manager isn't really clear on what they need the new hire to do.
They don't know what success looks like.
Exactly. They tell a story about a financial services company looking to hire a VP of strategic planning. The executive in charge, he said they needed someone to consolidate budget plans.
Sounds straightforward enough.
But then his boss jumped in and said, no, we need a visionary leader, someone to develop entirely new strategies and products.
Whoa. Talk about a disconnect.
Right. They were about to make a huge hiring mistake. The scorecard prevents that. It forces everyone to get on the same page before they even start looking at candidates.
The scorecard brings that clarity. So how do you build one?
It has 3 parts: the mission, the outcomes, and the competencies.
Okay, break it down for me. First, the mission.
The mission is a short, clear statement of the job's purpose. No jargon, no corporate speak, just plain language. They give a good example for a VP of sales. To grow revenue through direct contacts with industrial customers.
Straightforward, right. Very clear. What about a bad example?
Oh, they have a hilarious one. The mission for this role is to maximize shareholder value by leveraging core assets of the NPC division while minimizing communication deficiencies and obfuscations.
Ouch. That's a mouthful.
Total corporate gobbledygook. A good mission statement should be so clear that anyone can understand it. Like Arthur Rock, the guy who invested in Intel early on, said, Intel succeeded because they had the right people with the right skills at the right time. A good scorecard helps you define exactly what those right skills are.
Okay, the mission is the why. Next up, outcomes. What are we talking about here?
Outcomes are the specific, measurable things you expect the person in this role to achieve. For sales, it's often pretty simple. Hit your revenue targets. But for other roles, you need to get creative and define what success looks like in concrete terms.
Can you give me some examples?
Sure. For a marketing manager, an outcome might be develop and launch a new campaign targeting millennials within 6 months, resulting in a 20% increase in leads. For a community outreach coordinator, it could be increase attendance at community forums by 15% in the next year, as measured by registration data.
So it's about translating those big picture goals into tangible, measurable results for each role.
Exactly. And a lot of new hires actually find this level of clarity really helpful. Instead of feeling lost, they have a roadmap. They know exactly what they're being judged on.
Makes sense. And finally, we have competencies.
Competencies are the skills, behaviors, and traits someone needs to succeed in this role within your company culture. Smart and Street analyzed tons of data, interviewed countless CEOs, and they came up with a list of critical competencies for A players. Things like efficiency, honesty, organization, follow-through, intelligence, analytical skills.
Sounds like a pretty comprehensive list.
Yeah.
But you mentioned earlier that you need to tailor these competencies to the specific role and company culture, right?
Absolutely. That list is a starting point. Every job is different. Every company has its own vibe. You need to choose the competencies that matter most for this role in this company. For example, one CEO told a story about hiring a brilliant, passionate guy who just didn't fit in. He was great at his work, but his style clashed with the company culture. And another CEO had a similar experience with a CEO who was technically brilliant, but whose leadership style just didn't mesh with their values. It was a disaster.
So cultural fit isn't just a buzzword. It has real consequences.
It does. Centerbridge Partners, they even put treats people with respect and demonstrates trustworthiness on their scorecards. And they walked away from a super talented investor because he had a reputation for being a jerk. Talent isn't enough if they're going to poison the well.
The scorecard is more than just a hiring tool. It's a way to protect your culture.
Exactly.
So the scorecard connects your business strategy to the people executing it. It creates clarity and alignment.
Exactly. EMC, for example, built their reputation on great service, and their scorecards always emphasize that. Doug Williams from iHealth Technologies, he said, clear expectations laid out in the scorecard are absolutely essential for hiring, for promoting, for managing your team. Everyone needs to know what's expected of them.
Okay, can we look at a real-life scorecard just to give our listeners a concrete example?
Sure. Stoically Academy, A top-tier school, they needed a new head of school. Their scorecard focused on improving the curriculum, strengthening the faculty, and boosting financial stability. They set specific goals for curriculum innovation, teacher recruitment, and fundraising, and they listed key competencies: professionalism, discipline, caring, fairness, high standards.
So they knew exactly what they were looking for.
They did. And at first, they were drawn to candidates with traditional teaching backgrounds. But when they stuck to their scorecard, they realized that Collier O'Connor, who actually came from a more corporate background, was the best fit. His experience and his proven competencies were a perfect match for what they needed.
That's a great example. So for our listeners who want to create their own scorecards,
The key is to start with the mission. Define the job's purpose in plain English. Then, identify specific outcomes. What do you actually want this person to achieve? And then, choose the competencies that are essential for success in this role within your company culture. Review the scorecard with your team. Make sure it aligns with your strategy.
and make sure everyone involved in the hiring process has a copy.
Exactly.
Okay, we have our scorecard, our blueprint for success. Next step.
What?
Finding those A players. That's the source part of the A method.
Exactly. Finding great people doesn't happen by accident. It takes real effort. The CEOs of billion-dollar companies Smart and Street talk to, they all say talent acquisition is one of their top priorities.
They see it as a core leadership responsibility.
They do. And the number one way they find A players? Referrals. Asking their networks. Who are the most talented people you know? It sounds simple, but it's incredibly effective. High performers tend to know other high performers.
Makes sense. Birds of a feather and all that. So referrals are key.
They are. Patrick Ryan, the guy who built Aon Corporation into a multi-billion-dollar business, he personally recruited at least 30 people every year just by asking his network that question. Who are the most talented people you know? He built amazing teams by consistently nurturing those relationships.
So it's about staying in touch, building those connections over time. What about other sources of A players?
Don't limit yourself. Ask your customers, your business partners, even your suppliers for recommendations. Go to industry events, strike up conversations, and ask, who are the most talented people in your field? You'd be surprised how many people are willing to help.
It's about turning everyday interactions into recruiting opportunities.
Exactly. And don't forget about your own employees. Employee referrals are gold. They know your culture. They know what it takes to succeed in your company. Salim Vasul at Middleby Corporation, he credits 85% of their new hires to employee referrals. And Paul Tudor Jones at Tudor Investment, he's had much better luck with referred candidates.
So you're basically turning your whole company into a talent scouting network.
Exactly. And you can even extend that network further by deputizing friends of the firm. These are people who are invested in your success but aren't employees, advisors, mentors, industry contacts.
And how do you incentivize them to help?
It could be a bonus, special perks, or even something more creative, like offering them a chance to invest in your fund. One company did that with their network of senior executives, and it worked brilliantly. For startups, advisory board members can be a great source of talent. Eric Cohen at WHI Capital Partners, he's built their entire portfolio by networking. He calls it the dating approach to recruiting.
Networking like you're looking for a soulmate. I like it.
It's about building authentic relationships. And if you do need to hire an external recruiter, treat them like a partner. Give them deep insight into your company and your culture, what you're really looking for. Don't just hand them a job description. Ed Evans at Allied Waste says you need to let them peek under the kimono so they understand your company's DNA.
Okay, so we're actively sourcing potential A players. What's the next step?
Don't drop the ball now. You need a system for tracking these people. A simple spreadsheet, a CRM system, even index cards. The key is to schedule dedicated time each week, even just 30 minutes, to follow up and nurture those relationships. Keep that conversation going.
Consistent, dedicated effort. That's the key. And I love the story Smart and Street tell about the Bank One CEO search. How did those sourcing principles play out there?
It's a great example. The board members, James Crown and John Hall, were tasked with finding a new CEO. They ended up hiring Jamie Dimon, but it wasn't easy.
Dimon wasn't exactly looking for a new job, was he?
No, he wasn't. They had to really work at it. They reached out to their network. They treated no as a starting point for negotiation, and they constantly asked for recommendations. Their persistence and the fact that they made Dimon feel like a top priority, that's what ultimately won him over.
Persistence pays off.
It does.
So the source step is all about proactive networking, consistent follow-up, and treating talent acquisition as a top priority. Now let's move on to select. How do you actually choose the best candidate from that pool of potential A players?
This is where we leave voodoo hiring behind and get serious about data. Steve Kerr, he said most traditional interviews are practically useless for predicting job performance, and decades of research back him up. Gut feeling and unstructured interviews just don't cut it.
So what's the alternative? What does the A method recommend?
They use a 4-interview process. The screening interview, the who interviewee, the focused interview, and the reference interview. Each one has a specific purpose.
Okay, 4 interviews. That sounds pretty thorough.
It is.
Let's start with the first one, the screening interview.
The goal here is to quickly weed out the B and C players. Save yourself time and energy. It's a short phone call, no more than 30 minutes, and it's highly structured. Same questions for every candidate.
What kind of questions are we talking about?
4 key areas. What are your career goals? What are your strengths? What are your weaknesses? And then this killer question. Who are your last 5 bosses? And how will they each rate your performance on a 1-10 scale when we talk to them?
Wow, that's direct.
And effective. It sets the expectation that you will be checking references. Plus, you're listening for specifics. Vague answers are a red flag.
Makes sense. So you're looking for honesty, self-awareness, and concrete evidence of past performance.
Exactly. The goal is to hit the gong fast, like on a game show. Identify the mismatches and move on.
Okay, so we screened out the obvious no's. What's next? The who interviewee.
The who interview is the heart of the select process. It's about digging deep into the candidate's career history and seeing how that aligns with your scorecard. This type of interview, it's been proven again and again to be the best predictor of future performance. Brad Smart, Geoff Smart's father, he was a pioneer in this area. He said, past behavior is the best predictor of future behavior.
You're what you did.
That's the idea. So, for each job on the candidate's resume, you ask a set of questions. What were you hired to do? What accomplishments are you most proud of? What were your biggest disappointments? And then the people questions. Who did you work with? And what will former boss's names say were your strengths and weaknesses?
That's the threat of reference check, the TRC you mentioned earlier.
Exactly. And you always say, will say, not would say, to reinforce that you're actually going to call those people. For managers, you also ask, how would you rate the team you inherited? And then, why did you leave that job?
So you're painting a detailed picture of their career, understanding their successes, their failures, and how they interact with others.
Exactly. And you're listening for consistency. Do their stories add up? Are there any red flags?
And they give some pretty wild examples in the book, right?
Oh, yeah. Like the guy who admitted to bugging his boss's office. It shows how much you can uncover if you ask the right questions.
Wow. Okay, how long does a who interview usually take?
About 3 hours on average. It can be shorter or longer depending on the person's career. But given how important it is, Smart and Street recommend that the hiring manager should conduct it personally.
That makes sense. You want the person who's ultimately responsible for the hire to get that firsthand knowledge. What are some of their master tactics for conducting an effective who interview?
One is painting a picture. Really try to understand the details of their experience. Visualize the projects, the teams, the challenges, and then stopping at the stop signs. Look for inconsistencies in their stories. Pay attention to their body language. It can tell you a lot.
Okay, we've screened our candidates. We've done the who interviewee. What's the next step?
The focused interview. This is where you go deeper into specific outcomes and competencies that are crucial for this role based on your scorecard.
So you're getting even more granular.
Right. And you can assign different interviewers to focus on different areas. For example, one person might focus on sales skills, another on leadership skills, another on cultural fit. First, Solar, the solar panel company, they have a separate interview just for assessing cultural fit.
Makes sense. You want to make sure the person aligns with your values.
Exactly.
And then the final interview, the reference interview. Why is this still necessary after all those other interviews?
Because reference checks can uncover things you'd never find out otherwise. Robert Hurst, he worked at Goldman Sachs and Crestview Advisors. He told a story about a CFO they hired without checking references.
What happened?
It was a disaster. Turns out the guy had a history of problems they knew nothing about.
So you're saying skipping reference checks is a big mistake?
Huge mistake. You can miss critical information. When you call references, you want to confirm the basics, employment dates, job title. Then, ask them to rate the candidate's performance on a 1-10 scale and explain why they gave that rating. Ask about their strengths, their weaknesses, how they worked with others, why they left the company, would you rehire them? And then, circle back to anything that came up in the TRC section of the Who interview. The candidate mentioned you might say they were sometimes disorganized. Can you tell me more about that?
So you're not just accepting the candidate's list of references at face value. You're digging deeper.
Always. Jay Jordan from the Jordan Company, he even recommends talking to the candidate's former subordinates. They'll give you the unvarnished truth. Jim Crown, when he was recruiting Jamie Dimon for Bank One, he used his network to talk to people who'd worked with Dimon at different points in his career. It's about getting the full picture.
Leaving no stone unturned.
Right. The goal is to have at least 90% confidence that the candidate's skills match the outcomes you need, and that their attitude and behavior match your mission and competencies. That's the skill-will bullseye.
And Smart & Street also lists some red flags to watch out for, right? Even when a candidate seems great on paper.
They do. If someone badmouths their former bosses, or if they have a history of unexplained job hopping, those are warning signs. Same if their former colleagues don't give them glowing reviews.
So reference checks are crucial for catching those inconsistencies. What else?
If they're overly focused on compensation and benefits, that's a red flag. Also, be wary of people who try too hard to impress you, who constantly interrupt to add their brilliant ideas.
So arrogance and self-absorption are not A-player qualities.
Not in this framework. And watch out for people who start a lot of sentences with no, but, or however. It can be a sign of negativity and resistance.
Interesting. So the select phase is all about rigor, objectivity, and gathering real data to make informed decisions. We've sourced our A players. We've selected the best candidate. Now the final step, sell.
Don't blow it now. You've come this far. Don't lose your A player at the last minute.
So how do we seal the deal?
Put yourself in their shoes, understand what they care about. Smart & Street call them the 5 F's of selling: fit, family, freedom, fortune, and fun.
Okay, I'm listening. Fit, what does that mean in this context?
Fit is showing the candidate how their goals align with your company's mission and culture. Paint a picture of their future, how this role can help them achieve their ambitions.
So it's not just about selling the job, it's about selling the bigger picture.
Exactly. Then there's family. A career move affects the whole family. Be sensitive to their concerns. Involve them in the process, if it makes sense.
Thoughtful.
Gabriel Echevarria at Corona, he always welcomes the families of new recruits, especially if they're relocating. John Malone at Liberty Media, he personally addressed the concerns of a potential hires family about moving to Denver. Sometimes you need to go above and beyond to make them feel comfortable.
It's about recognizing that work-life balance is a two-way street.
Exactly. And Kelvin Thompson from Heidrick & Struggles, he says understanding the family situation is especially important for international assignments.
Makes sense. Different cultures, different expectations.
Right. And Greg Alexander at Sales Benchmark Index, he even suggests focusing a lot of your selling efforts on the spouse, especially for small companies. If the spouse isn't happy, the candidate might not take the job.
So happy spouse, happy life, happy employee. What's the next F?
Freedom.
Yeah.
This is about giving the candidate autonomy, the chance to make a real impact, especially important for nonprofits. George Hamilton from the Institute for Sustainable Communities, he said that while the pay might not be as high in the nonprofit world, the chance to make a difference is a huge draw for top talent.
Purpose over paycheck for some people.
Definitely.
Okay, what about fortune?
Fortune is pretty straightforward, fair, competitive compensation, and it should be tied to performance. Ed Liddy from Allstate, he said good people are worth paying for, and link their pay to their performance based on the scorecard. That way, everyone's incentives are aligned.
Makes sense. And finally, fun. What does fun look like in a work context?
Fun is about creating a positive,